In the late 19th century, as the sun of European imperial ambition blazed over the African continent, casting long shadows of colonization, conquest, and conflict, a small highland town in Ethiopia became the unlikely stage for a diplomatic drama whose consequences would reverberate across continents. The town was Wuchale, nestled among the rugged terrain of Ethiopia, a land fiercely proud, unconquered, and ruled by a monarch of vision and resolve, Menelik II, king of Shewa, and soon-to-be emperor of all Ethiopia. On the 2nd of May, 1889, in that quiet Ethiopian town, a treaty was signed, the Treaty of Wuchale. To the outside world, it was a simple document between two empires, the expanding Kingdom of Italy, newly ambitious and eager to carve out its colonial holdings in Africa, and the ancient Empire of Ethiopia, determined to preserve its sovereignty amid the tide of foreign domination. Representing their nations were Count Pietro Antonelli for Italy and Menelik II for Ethiopia. The treaty bore the promise of peace, mutual respect, and commercial exchange. 20 articles written in 2 languages, Amharic and Italian, outlined the framework for a lasting friendship. But peace on paper does not always mean peace in practice. Beneath the surface of diplomatic courtesies lurked a linguistic and political rift that would soon spark one of the most significant military confrontations in African colonial history. At the heart of the tension lay Article 17, a clause whose wording, depending on the language one read it in, held 2 utterly different meanings. To understand how this treaty came to be, one must consider the broader canvas of the time. The late 1800s were the age of the scramble for Africa, a period when European powers raced to claim vast swathes of African land. Italy, a relatively new and unified kingdom, found itself behind its imperial rivals. It had already claimed Eritrea and parts of Somalia, territories that bordered Ethiopia, and now looked hungrily toward Ethiopia itself. But Emperor Menelik II was no puppet ruler. He was astute, calculating, and profoundly aware of the imperial threat looming on his borders. Instead of resisting outright, Menelik made a strategic move. He agreed to a treaty with Italy. In exchange for recognizing Italian control over certain border territories and promising friendship, Ethiopia would receive financial and military support, and, most critically, an acknowledgement of its independence. With one hand, Menelik yielded marginal lands. With the other, he held firm to the sovereignty of his empire. The treaty's first articles painted a picture of cooperation. Article 1 declared perpetual peace between the 2 empires. Article 2 allowed each nation to appoint consuls and agents within the other's territories. Article 3 drew permanent boundaries, delimiting which villages and regions belonged to Italy and which to Ethiopia. It detailed, for example, that the highland areas would form the border, and that villages like Rafali, Hali, and Seganeti would fall under Italian rule, while areas like Adi Nefas and Adi Wanz would also be ceded to the Italians, marking a clear horizontal boundary between the empires. The middle articles of the treaty were deeply practical. They addressed issues of trade, travel, religion, and criminal justice. The monastery of Debre Byzan, for instance, though geographically in the Italian zone, would remain under Ethiopian religious control, on the condition that it would not be used for military purposes. Ethiopia would pay an 8% port duty to move goods through the port of Massawa, a vital trade artery. Yet, in times of war or national defense, the emperor retained the right to move his troops through Massawa free of charge. Articles 7 through 13 focused on citizen rights and jurisdiction. Ethiopians and Italians could travel and trade freely between the empires. They could practice their religions, retain their property if they died abroad, and be judged under their native laws regardless of where crimes were committed. A framework was laid for mutual understanding and civil cooperation. Article 14 was deeply personal to Menelik II. A known opponent of the slave trade, he ensured that the treaty gave him clear authority to eradicate slavery within Ethiopian lands. This clause was more than legal text, it was a declaration of moral authority and an assertion of Ethiopia's right to shape its own society. Article 16 allowed for future amendments, but with strict boundaries. Any changes would require a full year's notice and could only be made after 5 years, with the exception of border agreements, which were to remain immutable. Then came Article 17, seemingly innocuous, yet deeply consequential. In the Amharic version, it read, "His Majesty the King of Kings of Ethiopia can use the government of His Majesty the King of Italy for all business with other powers or governments." A choice, not a command. The emperor could choose to communicate via the Italians, but was under no obligation. The clause granted diplomatic flexibility, preserving Ethiopia's right to deal with foreign powers directly. But the Italian version was very different. It stated that Ethiopia must conduct all foreign relations through Italy. This subtle but explosive mistranslation transformed Ethiopia from an independent state into an Italian protectorate, at least in Italy's eyes. Italy quickly acted on this interpretation. In October 1889, Italian diplomats sent circulars to all major European powers, proudly announcing that Ethiopia was now under Italian protection. The world, with the notable exceptions of the Ottoman Empire and Russia, accepted this claim. But Menelik II did not. Outraged by this diplomatic deceit, he rejected Italy's interpretation. For years, tensions simmered. Ethiopia tried to negotiate, to clarify the treaty's meaning. But when diplomacy failed, and it became clear that Italy would not back down from its protectorate claims, Menelik made his move. In 1893, he formally denounced the Treaty of Wuchale. Italy, rather than backing off, chose confrontation. In 1895, the Kingdom of Italy invaded Ethiopia, initiating the First Italo-Ethiopian War. The war culminated in a battle that would become legendary, the Battle of Adwa in March 1896. Adwa was not merely a military engagement, it was a statement. Ethiopian forces, led by Menelik II and bolstered by a unified army from across the empire, met the Italians with tenacity, strategy, and overwhelming national will. For 2 days, battle raged in the Ethiopian highlands, and when the dust cleared, it was Ethiopia that had triumphed. The victory was decisive. Italy was forced to abandon its claims of protectorate status, and the two nations signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa, formally recognizing Ethiopia's full independence. The myth of European invincibility had been shattered. Ethiopia stood proud, not only as one of the few African nations to successfully resist colonization, but as a sovereign power that had dictated its own fate in the face of empire. And thus, the Treaty of Wuchale, born in miscommunication and marred by mistrust, became the catalyst for a defining moment in African history. It was a lesson in the power of words, the danger of duplicity, and the enduring strength of a nation determined never to be ruled. In the end, Wuchale was not just a treaty, it was a turning point, a moment when the ambitions of an empire were checked by the courage of a king, and when the hills of Ethiopia echoed with the cry of victory, not submission.